Thank you so much, Judith, and thank you to all the conference organizers for putting together this really wonderful event. We're very happy to be here. And the link to these slides is at tinyurl.com/VJ7PJB59. Although reading that from the slide, I wonder if some of those are eyes. So thanks, Veronica, for putting that in the chat. Our introductions are coming on the next slide. So let's go on to that slide. Thanks, Veronica. So I'm Amy Hofer, statewide Open Education Program Director with Open Oregon Educational Resources, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Veronica Vold, Open Education Instructional Designer with Open Oregon Educational Resources, and Chandra Lewis and Ben Skillman, who are a Senior Research Associate and Research Associate with RMC Research Corporation. Let's go to the next slide. Open Oregon Educational Resources promotes textbook affordability for community college and university students and facilitates widespread adoption of open, low-cost, high-quality materials. You can visit our website, openoregon.org, for more information showcasing what's happening across the state. And on the next slide, I'm going to read our equity statement in progress. We've got our traffic cones indicating that this is under construction. Open Oregon Educational Resources recognizes that our mission, vision, and values are not meaningful unless we account for past and present inequities. The systemic racism that led to Oregon being founded on stolen land as an all-white state has caused generations of harm. This privileges the lives of white people and shapes the experience of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color that live and learn here today. As a statewide program, we must attend to the impact our choices have on Oregon students. Our team provides tools and resources to make diversity, equity, and inclusion primary considerations when faculty engage with open course materials. We also continue to ask questions and learn together. We welcome being held accountable to the ideals in this statement via our contact page. And on the next slide, our contact page also has a link to join our Google group, which includes getting a weekly newsletter about goings on, and it's also a place to find community, ask questions, and connect with colleagues. So with that, let's go to the next slide. A chatterfall is a thing that we learned from Maha Bali when she gave a keynote for us at Open Oregon Educational Resources. And so we would like to try this out as well. And everyone feel welcome to just quickly make the chat in the Zoom turn into a waterfall of chats. So what we're inviting is any resources that you recommend that are openly licensed and are about instructional design with an equity lens, or that promote equity-minded design for higher ed. And the reason that we think that this might make for a good chatterfall is that there's so many new resources being created and shared all the time that it can feel hard to keep track. So we really hope that this chat can be a place to share what you're excited about, learn about something new that you didn't know about that already existed. And while that is happening, and please feel free to use the chat to share resources as we go along, I'll just reiterate what we're going to cover today. So Open Oregon Educational Resources, we're developing openly licensed subject-specific course materials with an equity lens. And it's a really large-scale project that received a federal open textbook pilot grant. And it involves a range of partners, including contracted instructional designers, to support faculty and help show the impact of our work. And we're collecting and reporting on student savings data, which is really important and wonderful to celebrate and share. And with RMC Corporation's help, we're also generating findings that relate to student outcomes and other squiggly line impacts that aren't like, dollars in, student savings out. It's less sort of bullet point and elevator pitch kind of impacts. They're harder to talk about in a soundbite, but really just as important, and we're just as excited to share. So we're gonna get some feedback about communicating about squiggly line impacts from the group at the end of our session. But for now, to start talking about our project, I will turn it over to Veronica.
Thanks, Amy. So hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you. Thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us. I'm going to share some context for our Targeted Pathways project. I'm going to describe some of our inclusive design practices, and then I'll feature one course design tool that helps us track progress toward our shared design work before handing things over to my colleagues. So please feel welcome to drop questions in the chat as we talk. We really want this to be a time where you take away things that really matter to you or things that you're curious about. So context, we've assembled a team of 5 instructional designers to support course pilot instructors for our 13 openly licensed textbooks. Our instructional designers partner with our course pilot instructors to design, develop, teach, and then revise open courses that fully integrate with our open textbooks. And we firmly believe that an equity-minded design practice begins with a strong relationship between an instructional designer and the subject matter expert, the instructor. So to that end, we offer compassion, curiosity, and attention toward an instructor's own personal teaching goals. So this relationship is at the center of our design work. Our overarching goals for course pilots are to enhance the student learning experience with the open textbook, to share feedback with the author team from students and instructors that are engaging in the drafted textbook in real time, so that comes back to the author team as part of the revision process, and to openly share the openly licensed course materials that are generated through the pilot process so that future educators can adopt them. And in keeping with the project's equity lens, we draw on several inclusive design frameworks. I want to call out some of the essentials from these practices because they guide both our direct consultations with instructors and then show up in our course tools, which we'll feature one of in just a sec, as well as the student survey instrument that our colleagues will share in just a moment. So my goal is to emphasize the through line from our equity-minded design thinking to the course design tools to the data that we're collecting from students about their experience. So as you see on the slide, we have a gorgeous, colorful flower, and there are 4 petals, each representing one of the inclusive design practices that we engage in our design thinking. I'm going to call them out, each one, and share an example of how they show up in the design work we do. So transparency in learning and teaching, or TILT, is a design practice that aims to strip away any hidden curriculum and make the unwritten rules of academia legible for students and fellow educators. This is especially useful in assessment design, where the purpose, tasks, and criteria for success are clearly defined, not only for students, but for future educators who may want to adapt that assignment. Universal design for learning is a set of 3 design principles that focus on learner variability as the starting point. Essentially, UDL recognizes that students possess different strengths, different challenges as learners. This framework designs for flexibility and student agency or choice, rather than assuming that one size fits all. In our design consultations, we look for multiple ways that students can express knowledge, multiple ways that students can listen, watch, read, engage in content, and multiple ways that students can gauge the relevance of the content to their own experiences. Third petal, culturally responsive teaching, or CRT, means that educators understand diverse student experiences and knowledge as assets rather than deficits. Culturally responsive teaching responds directly to inequities in existing social systems and asks instructors to reflect on how we assume students engage in content. From a design perspective, it means examining where students see themselves and their ways of knowing reflected in a course, or what Sarah Lambert would call recognitive justice, and how students are invited to connect course content to their own lived experiences. And finally, that 4th petal, the last petal on our flower, designing for accessibility. Instructors anticipate common barriers for screen reader software. They design the scope and length of reading and media assignments to ease cognitive load for students, maximizing engagement with the questions or concepts that matter most. And in our design consultations, we focus on the challenge of creating alt text and image descriptions, as well as descriptive links. We estimate that by the conclusion of this project in 2025, we will have completed about 60 individual course pilots. And honestly, the final number will probably be closer to 80 because we have repeat instructors that really want to continue to teach. So many of these pilots will be shared with the finished textbooks as openly licensed course packs, or a set of course materials that are aligned and ready to be adapted by future educators who want to teach with that book. So in the next 5 minutes, I want to focus on just one course design tool to help you see these inclusive design practices in action. And this tool, the success of this tool, it really depends on the relationship between the instructional designer and the instructor. If there's compassion and trust and curiosity, the tool can be quite powerful because it shows areas of strength and room for growth right before a course launches, right before students are invited into the experience that we've designed together. Instructional designers in the design, pilot, and revision phases of a course are asking questions, we're listening, we're offering suggestions, and we're reviewing drafts and iterations of course material as needed. And we do this in multiple ways. We do this synchronously as well as asynchronously in comments and shared Google Docs. We really want to prioritize what's most important to the instructors we support. And we also want to offer new perspectives and build in flexibility in our shared design thinking. So the equity-minded course review checklist that I'm about to share helps to surface what's been accomplished during that iterative process. It's a conversation tool that we use right before the teaching begins to really holistically discuss course site design, assessments, activities, and overall course accessibility. It's a 2-page document. It's intended to be short. It includes quality indicators as well as a column for notes from the instructional designer, indicating what work can be taken up in a future iteration or post-pilot for revision. And I'm going to tour the checklist now. So in our meeting chat, you have 2 links. You can choose which way you want to check out this equity-minded review checklist. The first option is an H5P image hotspot with interactive annotations describing the purpose of different parts of the checklist. And the second option is as a Google Doc with comments as annotations. And everyone should be able to view those comments if I set the permissions correctly. If there's any trouble, just let me know and we can update those permissions. I'm going to turn to this checklist just to give you a brief tour and a feel of how the inclusive design frameworks carry through in this tool that we use in conversation right before a course launches. You see that there's a space at the top for the instructor name and institution because we work with instructors from all institutions all across the state of Oregon. And we also work with instructors who are teaching multiple courses, sometimes in the same term. So we really try to keep our naming conventions consistent so that it's easy to tell which course it is that we're talking about. We also have quality indicators as well as room for notes for the reviewer. And with our leadership team, we decided to leave notes for the reviewer without ratings. The goal of this tool is to carry notes forward rather than issue a reading or an evaluation. It really is a space to contain the thinking and the conversation at this moment right before the course launches and to return to it again when you're ready for revision. So we want to sidestep the sort of intense, crunchy feelings of being evaluated or graded on your design and really root ourselves in area for growth and reflecting strength that we see at work. So I'm going to briefly call out some of these annotations in the tool. You'll see there's course site design is one of the content domains we look at, as well as quality indicators for assessment, course activities and content, as well as quality indicators for course accessibility. One of the most important quality indicators in course site design are course level learning outcomes and module objectives that are aligned and use student-friendly words. I want to call this one out because it harkens back to one of the very first tasks in a course design project where we're mapping out the relationship between course level and statewide learning outcomes and individual module or unit level learning objectives. Part of the excitement of being able to map this work out together is that students see how the whole course works together toward these goals. So this early design work really pays off by this point in the equity-minded course review. Under quality indicators for assessments, You'll see the transparency in learning and teaching, or TILT, criteria show up bright and clear. Some of the conversation starters focus on incorporating purpose, task, and criteria for success into the assessments, providing clear criteria like rubrics and exemplary student work for criteria for success. And then if you scroll down a little bit here, you'll see culturally responsive teaching as well as universal design for learning pop up. So students are encouraged to engage voices, histories, and knowledge with course content itself. And it's an opportunity to reflect on how successful the instructor feels they've been in meeting that objective, and to indicate areas for improvement as they're revising their course materials post-pilot. We also have an opportunity to reflect on use of open pedagogy, knowing that not all open pedagogy projects end up with an open license at the end. Some of these questions are really relevant to consider. Are students invited to share their coursework with one another, with their families, with their friends, with their communities? Are they invited to consider open licenses as a step toward collaboration? So an opportunity to sort of scale and think through how students are invited to step into that agency. We also have universal design for learning showing up and in different opportunities for interaction. And then we have quality indicators for course accessibility that we draw both from BC Campus and WCAG, so that we have a constant conversation that's flowing even before we get to revision and polishing, so that we're thinking through how students are invited to belong and to learn right from the beginning. And I'm going to pause there. I want to be mindful of our time and hand things over to our colleagues.
All right. Hey, so my name is Chandra Lewis, and I'm with RMC Research Corporation, and our company partners with school districts, with colleges, and many other types of organizations to implement project evaluations and also to help them conduct research. Our support ranges from developing surveys to collecting data to creating research designs and also analyzing very large data sets. So really a wide range of services that we provide. For this project, we worked with a team to collaboratively write the proposal, and then we submitted it to the U.S. Department of Education. And Ben here works with me at RMC, and he's going to describe how we measured the outcomes for this project.
Hi folks, my name's Ben. I work at RMC Research, as Chandra said, with Chandra. So the three ways that we measure the outcomes of this project are with the student survey, with the faculty survey, and with looking at course data. So we're going to start talking about some of the student survey elements. So as Veronica said, it's really important to be looking at these course materials with an equity lens. So we wanted to get the students' opinions on how well that's being incorporated into the materials. So we ask questions on effective wayfinding with items like this course site made it easy to track the work that was required and when it was due. Questions for transparent measures of success. Questions for scaffolding and project assessments. Opportunities for open practices. Universal design for learning. Culturally responsive materials and instruction. And accessibility. We also asked students some of their demographic characteristics. So we asked them to report their disability status, their race and ethnicity, if they're a full or part-time student, their Pell Grant eligibility, if they're a first-generation college student or the first in their family to attend college, if they're an international student, and what the first language they learned was. And for each of these student characteristics, we give them the opportunity to opt out or say, I prefer not to say, for any number of these items. And Veronica, if I can get the next slide. And another really important aspect of the student survey is measuring these effective outcomes. So we really want to get a sense of what students are taking away from these courses and how they're benefiting beyond just student savings. So the effective outcomes that we're looking at are motivation, and we have items such as I put a lot of effort into this course and I completed all the readings. We asked them about how interested they were in the content, so whether they wanted to learn more about the content that was covered in the course. We asked about their engagement in the course, so how often they would ask questions when they don't understand or help other students, or how often they were having fun in the course. We ask about their academic confidence. One such item is, I felt I could successfully apply the coursework in practical ways. And then another really big outcome that we're looking at is sense of belonging, both at the college level and in the course level. And the survey item that we use for that is, it's a little long. How often do you wonder, maybe I don't belong here, when you think about your college or this course? And I included there's a tiny URL at the bottom of this slide. I'll talk about it now so you can snag it while I'm talking. And that has open access versions of our student survey and our faculty survey, just so you can see all the items that we use and all the response options that we use also. And oh yeah, Veronica got it. Thank you. So for faculty, we ask about their characteristics. So if it's their first time using OER, what their role is, what institution they're at, and then the course name and the modality. We used to have the modality on the student survey, but the students were reporting different modalities. So we just decided it'd be better to move it to the faculty survey. We asked faculty their thoughts on professional development. So which sessions they attended, what resources they accessed, and then which of these they found helpful. We ask about their perceived impact of their professional development on their teaching, and then their level of preparedness to implement the things that they learned in the professional development. We ask about the changes that they made in the course. So whether they began incorporating or improved their use of open educational resources, open pedagogy, transparency in learning and teaching, culturally responsive materials, accessibility, and those universal design principles. We also ask about dissemination. We really want to encourage people to share their experiences. So we ask if they published or presented with on any of the changes in the course changes section. And we also ask just about project awareness. So just to get a sense of if they are aware of the project goals and if they have the information they needed to do their part in the grant. And lastly, we are in the process of establishing a system to gather student grade information and student demographic information for several years prior to the project and during project implementation. We're utilizing a quasi-experimental design to compare student outcomes prior to the project and during the project. So we're making these within faculty comparisons of how are students doing now using the textbook than they were before, compared to before the textbook was implemented. And also comparisons between faculty. So how are students taking Psych 101 with the textbook doing compared to students taking Psych 101 with faculty who are not using the textbook. And what we're expecting to see are higher end of course grades in courses that are using OER and lower DFW rates, which is the rate of students getting a D, F, or withdrawing mid-semester or mid-quarter, mid-session. And we're also expecting better outcomes for lower income students, part-time students, and minority students that are using in the courses using OER resources compared to comparison courses. And another thing we're considering is the level of implementation among the faculty. So looking at high implementing, so those that use the textbook and made significant changes to their course compared to people who lower implementing faculty who may have adopted the textbook but didn't adopt as many practices or incorporate as many practices in their teaching. And with that, I'll pass it to Chandra.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So Ben gave a nice summary of the different data sources that we're using. So it's the faculty survey, the student surveys, and then also the course grades. Veronica and Amy also thought this group might be interested in some of the techniques we use to make sure that the surveys elicited really meaningful information. So I wanted to share a few of those things with you before going on to the findings. So the first thing we did was we made sure to include valid and reliable measures that had already been developed in prior research studies. And if they're ones that didn't directly align with what we're doing, then we went ahead and developed some items as a team. And then we pilot tested the survey over and over and over again to really make adjustments to ensure that the survey was really clear and people knew what questions that they were answering. We also included the response option. I'm not sure what this question is asking. So we could identify questions that were really not making sense to students when they were taking the survey. Each time we piloted, we also assessed how long it took students to complete the survey so that we can ensure that it wasn't too long. And if there are other questions that we wanted to add, we can make sure we can add those without making it too lengthy. And as Ben noted earlier, we gathered a wide range of student demographic information, including Pell Grant eligibility, part-time status, et cetera. And this was so we could see if there were differences in subgroup findings. So maybe it was working for some groups, but not others. We really wanted to unpack that. And also to measure race and ethnicity, we asked students how they identify, and then we provided a really long list so students can select multiple identities. And in other projects, we asked the same question, but we gave students an open-ended space to respond. So it's always kind of just trying to figure out the best way to capture this information from students. And lastly, to compare our courses to other courses, we included items with a STEM. I was more blank in this course than other courses, so we could really see how students felt in the other courses compared to ours. All right, so Veronica wanted me to do a drum roll, but I'm not really good. The drum roll, exciting findings. So we're switching to the findings now. So first we'll talk about the faculty findings, and they're very promising. So faculty are changing their practices after participating in this project. And faculty stated that meetings with the project's instructional designer had the greatest impact on their teaching practices. And after engaging with all the project supports, they really felt prepared to implement what they had learned. And 87% of faculty reported incorporating or improving at least one practice in their pilot course. We also included this table on this slide, so you can see there were differences with faculty who are implementing OER the first time versus those who had implemented it more than once. And you can see that over time, they're incorporating more and more practices, which is really exciting. And as with the faculty data, we're seeing very exciting student results. And I have the highlights on this page. So students reported the course really made them want to learn more about the content that was covered. Compared to other courses, students said they felt more engaged, they were more motivated, they were more confident. And students also reported that the topics around diversity were really integrated throughout the course and they weren't a minor addition. Students shared that the course materials represented their identities in an affirming and positive way. And lastly, a very exciting finding, while only 48% of students reported a high sense of belonging at their college, 67% reported a high sense of belonging in their course. So we're really excited about that.
Thanks, Chandra. So I get to talk about how we're drawing implications and thinking through this data. And this is an ongoing process about synthesizing our conclusions. But in the short term, instructional designers take the student survey data alongside a faculty or instructor self-report at the conclusion of the pilot term and weave together in a post-pilot debrief how the course went, both from the instructor's own experience and from what the data of the student experience tells us. We focus on what to revise based on that weaving of both the instructor's own sense of how it went, which is also informed by the equity-minded course review that we do prior to launch. We focus on areas of diversity that are least represented in the data from what students have shared, as well as areas of confusion where students said that, no, I didn't really have multiple means of engaging with this content, or there weren't a lot of media or video. That's something that we pay attention to. And we also noted that the use of open pedagogy varies widely, right, depending on the instructor's own confidence level, as well as student familiarity with this concept. So that's also something that we're continuing to think about and wrestle with. As Chandra shared, the majority of faculty, 67%, found that their instructional designer meetings had the greatest positive impact on their teaching practices. So we highly recommend that grant programs at your institution or region invest in instructional design support and instructional design roles as part of your grant budget. This is, I think, something that the data shows us has the deepest impact or the deepest potential to change outcomes for students or change their learning experience. And in just a moment, Amy is going to lead us in a short activity so that we can start to generate some talking points about how you might make that case or how you might put together that argument, because this is a concrete move from talking about access as affordability to access as a deeper, meaningful learning experience, where a student's own knowledge and their own path is better represented and honored. In terms of future directions, our surveys could account for faculty who are newer to inclusive design practices compared to faculty who consider themselves more experienced or have more advanced in that area. It would be interesting to consider the kind of growth or needs that more experienced faculty might have for their instructional designer as they continue to level up or rethink their teaching practice. As we know that teaching is ongoing, you're never done learning how to be an excellent instructor. And I think it'd be useful, especially as our field considers the student learning experience more closely, to have more data on what was most effective for faculty. And I want to be mindful of our time. I'm going to hand things over to Amy so that we can start to think together about how to draw talking points from the data and experiences we've talked about so far.
Thanks, Veronica. And actually, Donnie asked such a great question in the chat that is a really nice segue into this. So Donnie said, I wonder if you could speak more about anticipated better outcomes. OER makes the materials available early in the semester, so every student has access, etc. But are there other reasons why you have found better outcomes? And when we put together the narrative for this grant proposal, we were clear in the narrative that we didn't expect the open license per se to have an impact on student outcomes. Exactly as you say, Donnie, like the open license just tells you about the copyright status of the work and what permissions you have. It doesn't tell you about the quality. And for the purposes of this project, we defined quality as course materials that are relevant, aligned with our course outcomes, accessible, and designed with an equity lens. So we've really stayed focused on that definition of quality. And the blog post that I shared a link to talks about how we really expect to see impact because of what we are trying to do to improve the quality of course materials. So we're saying like students are going to do better, not because it was openly licensed and not because it was free online or available in print at low cost, although that's a really awesome benefit, but because of these other changes that we're making that have a lot to do with working with an instructional designer, as Veronica was talking about. So with that, let's talk a little bit about this squiggly line impacts idea, because like what I just told you, I wouldn't tell you in an elevator. It took me like a couple of paragraphs to say it, and our blog post is, you know, pretty long. So what I am wondering about and what we wanted to bring to all the expertise that's in this room here is this question, like, are people finding ways to like boil down and really effectively communicate about squiggly line impacts that aren't, you know, we saved $1 million for students. That's like so wonderful and so celebratory and really important. And it's also a part of what we do. And we want to be able to talk just as effectively about the other piece of what we're doing here. So we have a Google Doc that Veronica, thank you, Veronica shared in the chat. Veronica, I need a reminder. I think, did we say that we're going to be quiet and let people fill in?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to give people a minute here. I put an example in the first row. So like a talking point example would be, Increased sense of belonging can have an impact on student retention. Okay, what issue is this addressing? It's addressing the benefits of inclusive course materials. And the intended audience would be administrators who are worried about enrollment. So that was an example talking point that I put in. And I will now stop talking and give people a minute to think quietly, and then we'll bring it back to the discussion.
Let's take about 2 more minutes. If you want to finish up the thought that you're working on right now. Yeah, I agree, Ash. Ash says in the chat, it's amazing the swath of awesome content that can be created in literally 5 minutes of brilliant people hanging out. Yes. So as folks are finishing up their final thoughts, I'm curious to hear from you as you look through this list that we generated by awesome people in 5 minutes. What stands out to you? What leaps out at you? What are some talking points that maybe you haven't considered before about the quality of OER and the audience that you might talk to them or talk to about it? Feel welcome to unmute or pop in the chat. Anali calls out empowerment. Melanie calls out agency and community. Kevin, the flexibility of OER formats and content. And I feel like Amy's favorite here we should read out loud. You know how it's an absolute nightmare syncing up that homework system with the LMS Grade Center? How students panic and reach out to you with dozens of emails about the inclusive access book not working properly or not being able to access that content? You'll never have to do any of that again. Lol, so true. Abby says the wide array of potential stakeholders addressed here. Yes, we have instructors and students, faculty adopters, funders, CTE faculty. Yeah, this one stood out to me. Lessons and materials directly connect with the lived realities of students, particularly in the industries that they're studying for. And I think that that's a particular argument that's made possible when instructional designers and instructors have time together to think through the specific needs of that institution, that school, that program. Yeah, and we have a hand raised. Ash, please go for it.
Yeah, I love that there's the intended audience column, because I think often when I'm thinking about advocacy efforts, I'm not actually necessarily dividing up my message by who I'm speaking with. And so, yeah, being able to really target each audience is really handy.
Agreed. Thanks, Ash. Are there any others that we really want to call out together right now that are just dazzling or scintillating for you? Catalina says, amazing collaborations. There's a lot here. Yeah, this is a much bigger list than we expected, and there are 53 folks in the room, which is really exciting. I love that students on our focus in the end, says Donnie. Yes, agreed. And I think this one, I'll point this one out before I hand things back to Amy. Adapting and creating OER creates a sense of academic rejuvenation, specifically relating to faculty burnout. So the sense of empowerment or what's possible, or being able to tap into what a strong relationship can produce for students and community, especially for instructors who have used the same material for years and maybe are reluctant to make a switch. That's also something that I think we want to pay attention to, is how do we create that capacity, and how do we link that to available funding or to decision-making power. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Amy, and then I believe we have time for questions.
Yeah, so if you bring us back to our slide deck, the next slide is our last slide. And it's got our contact information on it. Please do feel welcome to reach out if you want any more information or if you want to connect. And thank you so much for being here and participating in our activity with us. And it does make me really hopeful that we can be effective in communicating about these impacts. So we have a little bit under 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question either in the chat or if you want to turn on your microphone to ask. Yeah, Kata.
Hi, thank you. So, my name is Catalina. I am from Costa Rica. I am an IFMC delegate, and I would like to ask you, like, the question for the sense of belonging. I think the data that you came out was really meaningful. So I'm curious, what were your thoughts behind this question that I found like creative into this space? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think a lot of people noticed that question. So Chandra, do you want to talk a little bit about, because you were the person that brought the question to us actually, because it had a really high correlation with other factors relating to student success. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
I think I'm having a little bit of technology issues, so I didn't quite hear the question.
Okay, yeah,
Is it
so
about the belonging item?
exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for that one, there was a lot of, they're trying to, throughout the research, capture belonging and figure out the best items. So there are all these scales developed over time, and they tested them and tried to correlate with different things like retention in classes and grades. And what was interesting is this one group of researchers, they tried out all these scales, and then what they found was just that one item about, do you feel like you belong here, was it was most reliable when you were trying to capture that kind of information and then tie it to other outcomes, which I thought was really powerful that we could just get that in one item. But then we made sure to ask a bunch of other questions so we could get more understanding around it. But I was really excited that we found that. I don't know if that answered the question.
And can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
If the results were like kind of disappointing, more on the like low sense of belonging, what would be like your practical approaches or ideas to that?
Yeah, so at least what I'm really excited about is these are self-reported findings, which is like the first step. And then what we'll do is tie it to their course grades to see if there's like a connection, like students that were reporting like higher belonging in certain courses. And then also slicing it by different courses or maybe faculty members that implemented more practices than others to really see like deeper in the story, like where we're seeing that finding happen more often than not and why that might be.
And I think Veronica might be a good person to also answer that follow-up question about like, well, what if we hadn't gotten the result that we wanted with that question? Because that's where Veronica's instructional design work comes in. So do you want to address that?
Yeah. So if an individual instructor had a lower sense of belonging indicated from their student survey report, I would look at the other measures that students are reporting around their sense of confidence in the course, around their sense of the instructor's use of universal design for learning. I'd also look at the direct student comments where they're able to share just open-ended, like, is there something that you want us to know about your experience in this course, and comb through that to see if individual students have identified something specific that the instructor did or did not do. There are also specific questions around the instructor's presence in the class that help us understand more of, because course design is never just the course, right? That it's an iterative interaction that only happens in real time between two living people, right? So you pay attention to how students measure their sense of the instructor's responsiveness, for instance, right? Like, or their clarity of feedback they received on their work. There are so many factors that contribute toward a sense of someone's belonging or exclusion. And so I'd look holistically at some of the other measures that we ask students to share with us. And I'd also look at the instructor's self-report, because that's also part of what we do in the course debrief for revision planning. We talk with the instructor as soon as the end of the term, as soon as we can at the end of the term, because as I'm sure everybody knows, life moves quick, and closing that course and starting another one, it can be difficult to draw up what's really salient or specific about that course. So that's another response in thinking through what might contribute to someone feeling excluded. Sometimes I think it's also important to point out that if you're talking about difficult concepts, like you're talking about racism, you're talking about homophobia, you're talking about histories of oppression, often that is really uncomfortable work for some students. It might be the very first time, for example, a white student is talking about race consciously. And so looking at some of the student demographics in the course, like is this a course where students are a white majority class? Is this a course where it's a minority majority class? That can also help to draw out some of the salient details about what students might be experiencing. It's a great question.
Thank you so much for the great insight to you both.
Thanks for turning on your mic to ask. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I think, Judith, if you need to end the session, we can stick around and keep talking. But a question from Mayina is, I'm wondering, when designing the OER course, how to decide what kinds of forms of OER to be adopted, because there are so many different types of OER, such as different multimedia or platforms, et cetera. And that's such a great point. I mean, an open educational resource could be anything that you use for teaching and learning that you put an open license on, right? And in the case of this project, we got the grant to create openly licensed textbooks and openly licensed course packs. And as Veronica mentioned, the course pack includes the course map and the assessments, and maybe even a link to a shell, like some of the ancillaries that future instructors need to really implement the textbook in their own course. But, you know, in our open application OER grant program, we are not prescriptive about what you create or what you share with your students at all. So somebody earlier, I was in a session where somebody said, well, what problem are you trying to solve when you are making this OER, right? Like that goal that you are starting with is so important when you're choosing your format and platform. So I think that's a really great question, because we don't really have like a horse in the race about textbooks as a format per se. I also, yeah, please.
Oh, I was going to add one thing about formats. We're sharing our course packs as shareable Google Docs because the actual text can be super useful for folks. We have, I think, 5 different LMSs in Oregon, and trying to get them to play nice with one another, like importing from D2L to Canvas or from Canvas to D2L, can be kind of challenging. So we really are thinking about, well, how can we get this information out in as many formats as possible so that you can take the content and easily ingest it into your own LMS. So that's something that we've been thinking about.
Amy, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but then I will make you a host, and anyone who wants to stick around and talk to you more about your amazing work is more than welcome to. So before I go, let me just thank everyone, the presenters, such amazing, amazing information. Thank you for sharing, and thanks to all who joined us. I'm going to stop the recording now.